welcome to Brave New Conversations. So pleased to have you here today.
It's wonderful to be here. I've worked with Brave New Films from a distance, and it's great to be in the studio.
Right, excellent. Well, I know so many of us are familiar with your work from afterdowningstreet.org and also your work with Representative Dennis Kucinich as his press secretary and also Democrats.com. Would you like to speak briefly to that work that you've done?
Well, I used to work for the now infamous community group Acorn, and I left that work after some enjoyable but rough years there to work for Congressman Kucinich. That was just for his presidential campaign in 2004, and we lost. I don't know if you heard, but that was a wonderful experience, and I continue to consider him a friend and an ally, and almost always dramatically better than the other 434 members of Congress on most things, and not because his constituents are any different, but because he chooses to take a different approach, and some others do that sometimes too. But Democrats.com is a terrific organization. It's not the party. It's a independent organization that I serve as the Washington director for, and that involves organizing and blogging and activism and coalition work with groups like Brave New Films, and whenever there's a wonderful new video about Afghanistan, we put that at Democrats.com, or fact sheets about Afghanistan, we put those there, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place to work where I get to work on what I think is most important and work around the clock because I'm a workaholic, and work from home so I don't have to commute even in normal traffic, much less Los Angeles.
Right. Well, I would like to talk about your new book, Daybreak, Undoing the Imperial Presidency and Forming a More Perfect Union. Now, what was the inspiration going from the work that you've done on the ground as an activist and also on the web to writing this book?
Well, I had been doing work with Democrats.com and Progressive Democrats of America and United for Peace and Justice and Code Pink and Backbone Campaign and Voters for Peace and all the dozens of groups I'm leaving out on mostly on the peace movement, mostly on trying to end these wars and shift from this militarism to, jobs and infrastructure and healthcare and schools. And working in particular on accountability and exposing abuses and shifts in power and crimes and outright open felonies by high officials. And so we were pushing to expose pieces of evidence and to hold people accountable in a variety of ways through Congress, through the courts, and generally on these issues and on almost every other issue, running against this situation where the majority of the American public want one thing, and our government in Washington almost always does something radically different. And yet we're supposed to be a representative republic. We're bombing other nations into democracy and so forth. And so I got an opportunity to take a month off and answer no emails and turn off the telephone and not answer the door and draft a book. And so it was sort of a break from activism, looking at, well, what's happening in Washington? How did it used to be? Is it worse now? How could we be more strategically engaged as citizens to change things? And in the long run, ideally, what do we want to change it into? And so part of the book is an analysis of things gone wrong through history, and in particular in the past 8 or 9 years. And a lot of it is, well, what do we got to do about it?
And what has been your reception to particularly the segment of the book that you dedicate to Bush-Cheney, the administration accountability? Have you encountered the Bush fatigue, like, they're out of there, we don't want to deal with them anymore? Or do you feel like there is a strong public support for accountability still?
Well, there is. In what polling there's strong public support, and certainly the people who show up at my events want to put Bush and Cheney in prison. Congressman Alan Grayson sent around an email that said, Dick Cheney's still on the loose. Dick Cheney's not behind bars, send me money. And
he's great.
No, he's fantastic. People sent him over $500,000 in a day. But do you know what he was going to do to hold Dick Cheney accountable?
What's that?
Go on television and call him a vampire. Which, if you will forgive me, has no teeth to it.
Right.
I love Congress members who say better stuff than the Congress members who say worse stuff.
But then what will come of that, actually? in practical purposes?
Well, it's helpful for a congressman, and Congressman Grayson does do things, at least on other issues. I hope he does some things on that issue. But for a congressman who doesn't speak from cowardice and fear and try to be a Republican rather than try to excite people who aren't voting at all, it's a wonderful lesson, just like the lesson of Kucinich's electoral wins time after time. The Republicans are afraid to run someone against Congressman Grayson. Now, he's got a lot of money too, but what's key is that he's got all this support by speaking truth to power and speaking honestly.
And in a creative sense, really.
Right, and so he's tapping in to a huge desire in that instance to put Dick Cheney behind bars. Whether he'll do anything about it, it remains to be seen. But the public will and passion for it is tremendous.
Now, speaking of Congressman Grayson, let's speak to the Congress in general, because also in your book, Daybreak, you seem to downplay this, this obsession to constantly be hammering at the president as the person we have to write to for all of our problems and hoping for change. And you seem to be pressing for us to go to our congresspeople
Yes.
and have that sort of route. Will you speak to that?
We could put a crown on a president's head, make their children heirs to the throne, and we wouldn't obsess over the crevices of their inner soul anymore. We wouldn't drain any more of our energy on that. We used to protest at the White House, but we didn't think Bush would listen to us. We didn't go to meetings in the White House. We didn't tell everyone, phone, fax, email the White House and ask the president to end the wars. We went, at least in recent years, primarily and most usefully in my mind, to the House of Representatives and said, stop paying for the wars. Now, the peace movement sends out endless emails. Code Pink's one of the best peace groups I've ever seen, sent out an email just recently that said, what will he decide? And you don't need to explain who he is. Everybody knows. I mean, if it was from a church, maybe it'd be a different he, but otherwise, you know who he is, right? Right? And it's all about the president. Every peace group, I'm not picking on any one, all of them, the ones I work with too. And on top of that, it's ask him not to escalate the war. So that, which you'd think makes sense. First, we don't escalate it, then we scale it back. That's not how things work. You frame a debate, and one side is 40,000 troops. If the other side is keep it as it is, then the middle ground is 20,000 troops. I want to end the war. And if you're trying to persuade people with an explanation of what Afghanistan is about and get them to rethink it, then you have to have an argument that makes sense. And keeping the same level and not shrinking it or expanding it doesn't make any sense to anybody. So I think strategically, we have to, not journalists, not pundits, not filmmakers, but citizens who have limited time, have to focus on the House of Representatives. It's very, very hard to influence a president. It's very, very hard to influence a senator. And if you want to cut off money, you cut it off in the House. So to have these bills that say we want an exit plan, we won't fund an escalation, we'll have a tax on the war expenses and so on, these are all to send messages. And it's great to send those messages and move the debate that way. But to imagine passing those through the Senate and past the president's desk, when the House of Representatives can just build a list of members committed to voting no on the money, and then the Senate and the president can do whatever they want, but they can't fight wars because they don't have the money. That's a serious approach. That's the top demand that's missing. And then the other demands that are steps in that direction are good as well.
And I'm wondering, too, if we did actually start turning the debate that way and focusing our energies on the House, would that cure some of this obsession with the unitary executive and that was built up, maybe not founded, but built up during the Bush-Cheney years, that the executive is what we have to focus on and they are the deciders? And if we help turn the debate towards Congress, would that help rectify some of that perception?
It would put more people in the streets and in the suites and active because, if there were a President McCain now, the peace movement would never have been defunded and shut down. Because there's a President Obama, you have people, individual, well-meaning citizens who don't want to protest their friend, the president, or think it's not strategic to protest a popular president. And of course, they identify wars with the president. We have this pretense among those who oppose wars and those who support wars that wars belong to the president, contrary to the Constitution.